So it's 12:45. I want to welcome everybody back from our lunch break. Our next session this afternoon from 12:45 to 2 p.m. is Working Towards Housing Choice, Lessons Learned from the HOP Grant Program, the Housing Opportunity Planning Grant Program. You have me again, Noah Hodgetts. I will be your moderator again, Principal Planner at the Office of Planning and Development. And with me today is John Christ, the Planning Board Chair with the Town of Plymouth, Joseph Perez, the Town Planner from the Town of Plymouth, Susan McLeod, Land Use Secretary with the Town of Sandwich, Mike Tardif, the Executive Director of the Central New Hampshire Regional Planning Commission, and Judy Barrett, Founding and Managing Director of Barrett Planning Group, LLC. I realized in my mission in putting these slides together with everybody that I did not put a slide together about kind of the basics of the HOP grant program. So before we kind of dive in to hearing from all 5 of our speakers, I'm just going to give a very, very brief background about the program. So as you all know, Governor Sununu launched the $100 million Invest NH initiative about 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago now. Part of that was a $5 million for planning and zoning grants. All of the speakers today were either consultants for planning and zoning, housing opportunity planning grants, HOP grants, or were a town that received grants either. And the program really provided funding for 3 different phases. The first phase was needs assessment and updating the housing related chapters of the master plan. The second phase was doing a regulatory audit, either an audit of the site plan and subdivision regulations or zoning ordinance. And the third phase was regulatory change. And so you're going to hear a lot today about efforts in about 5, 6 different communities that were in phase 3 of the program at that regulatory change phase, and lessons learned from their efforts. What went well, what didn't go well, and how to improve for the future. I do want to say, very exciting, which I will put a note of, include a link to at the end of the presentation. The additional $2.9 million has been appropriated to the Invest NH Housing Opportunity Planning Grant Program. And actually, as of yesterday, since when I put these slides together, you can now go on to NHOPgrants.org, and I will put the link in the chat for folks to check out. And you can go read more about the new update and the details of when the additional funding application deadlines and such. The new application is not up there yet, but you will see kind of the basic confines. The new deadline will be September 30th, and all communities will be able to apply for that funding. And existing HOP grantees will have, and community housing navigators will have first dibs at that funding. Just want to give that little bit of a background, and I'll just talk about the format real quick. So as I said, our 5 speakers are going to each do a kind of lightning round of introductions and kind of highlights from their communities and lessons learned. And then we're going to do a bit of a roundtable discussion with all 5 of the speakers. Feel free during that time, if you have questions, to put them in the chat box. And if there's any outstanding questions at the end, we can hopefully have time for that as well. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Joseph and John from Plymouth.
Thank you very much, John, for doing this. My name is John Christ, and I'm here with Joseph Perez in Plymouth. And Joseph joins you as planner and myself as chair of the planning board. And we do have a lot of material on our slides to share with you all. And that being said, we'll try to keep our remarks fairly brief so we can hopefully have a lively conversation where we delve much deeper into all these issues. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Joseph.
Yeah, thank you, John. And thank you to Noah and everyone at Office of Planning and Development for pulling this together. It's so great to have this session on housing and preservation. And thanks to everyone who has agreed to share part of their weekend to discuss these topics with us. So Noah gave a pretty great background on the HOP grant. Plymouth was a recipient for all 3 phases of the Housing Opportunities Planning Grant. We got needs assessment, regulatory audit, and regulatory development. All the way back at the end of 2022, the town pulled together a steering committee and selected a consultant, Barrett Planning Group, who's also represented on this call, and I think you'll hear from Judy Barrett a little bit later. But first, I wanted to just give a little bit of background about Plymouth for those who may not be familiar, and about some of the factors that led the town into undertaking this project. So Plymouth is roughly central in New Hampshire, geographically speaking. Plymouth has a population of about 6,600, and Plymouth has kind of a unique role as the center of the Plymouth labor market area, which is a pretty large rural labor market area, population about 30,000, who really rely on Plymouth largely for shopping, services, healthcare, education. And so, Plymouth has a lot of people who rely on it who may not necessarily reside in Plymouth, who may work there, shop there. Plymouth also has a pretty large, proportionally speaking, presence from Plymouth State University, which has a student population of about 3,800, and it really is situated right in the downtown area. And furthermore, Plymouth last completed a housing study in around 2003, which was under very different circumstances than we're seeing today. And sort of revisiting that study led to an understanding that this all really merits another look. That was done in the context of rising student enrollment at Plymouth State University. It was done in the context of, throughout the 1990s, Plymouth actually had a pretty large, pretty high level of vacancy in its housing stock, which was slowly coming back online, both in the form of student housing and just in general coming back online. So those factors led Plymouth's housing needs, mostly throughout the 90s, to be met without a large level of new development, even amidst economic development and growth. So that being said, it's a very different circumstance today where, in Plymouth, as throughout the state, housing supply, housing costs are a major topic of discussion. And also this question of, is there a mismatch between the regulations that exist in Plymouth or in any other community, and the built environment that exists today, and also the built environment that the community wants to see. And I think that's probably a familiar story for a lot of historic New Hampshire village center communities. Plymouth also has a pretty broad range of geographical, within its geography, has a pretty broad range of neighborhood character types, which makes regulating land uses in Plymouth a bit interesting. You have your historic village center, you have Plymouth State University situated right in the middle of that. You have traditional village center residential neighborhoods radiating out from the Main Street core. You also have a growing sort of big box store corridor, which is Tenny Mountain Highway, scattered suburban development throughout various parts of the community. And you also have a number of manufactured housing parks. You have very rural agricultural communities, often along dirt roads, in a very different pattern of development than what might be just up the road. And then you also have Tenny Mountain, which is a ski area that has at various points been operational, and then for much of the past decade or so has not been operational, but just recently has been open for skiing the past couple of winters. So that has a sort of its own unique set of circumstances. It saw a fair amount of housing development in its heyday, and it's often talked about as a development opportunity. So I'll turn it back over to John to kick it off as far as the community engagement that we started with, to sort of bring everybody to the table and start these conversations.
Thank you, Joseph. So yeah, in any planning process, of course, outreach and engagement is key. And it was really great to see that in the HOP process, the engagement was really kind of baked into the process. And that was wonderful to see. And of course, more than anything else, for a smaller community, having the capacity to do that with the help of a consultant was really kind of key. And so I have a list here of some of our outreach initiatives and some pictures as well. Online survey, stakeholder interviews, community meetings, informational videos at various points in the process, a couple of walking tours, what Joseph will talk about in a moment, landing page, mailers, flyers, just to get more people in the know and involved. And of course, at the end of it, like any process like this, public hearings. There's lots of takeaways from all of this outreach. I just kind of pulled a few out for now. Of course, and this is not a unique story, taxes and parking came up over and over and over again. One of the things that was really heartening was that there was quite a bit of appetite for change at the community meetings that we saw. A lot of people really did want to do something. At the same time, we saw a lot of desire to preserve our character, and somehow gelling the two of them with one another, it's a challenge, and they can be kind of pushed against one another. I think there is a way to make them work together, but that is a challenge. Similarly, we saw a lot of aspirations towards developing more single-family housing as part of all of our hopes and dreams. And at the same time, we faced the kind of realities that single-family detached housing on larger plots of land really isn't within the picture for many people. And how do we balance those two things? Concern over demographics and who's in our community, obviously, comes up and is a difficult one to navigate. School enrollment similarly. Broader lessons learned. The outreach capacity from this HOP funding has really been a game changer in terms of getting work done. The Housing Academy I thought was really fantastic in not just telling us what to do, but kind of modeling the process for us and walking interested parties who went to the academy through that process rather than just telling them what it looks like. Targeted neighborhood outreach, I think we probably could have done a bit more of in various points in the process to really kind of get a sense of local community buy-ins. I think in any planning process, especially where it might get contentious, not focusing on what you're going to change, but on the strengths you're going to build on and expand upon, I think is really key. I'm sure we can all identify with the kind of linguistic treachery of talking about housing in certain terms and how that might trigger some people, and the importance of visual tools, which I'll get to again in a moment. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Joseph.
Yeah, thank you, John. So I wanted to highlight one particular form of outreach in a little more detail that we were able to undertake a few examples of throughout this process. And I think this is something we hear a lot about, this idea of walking tours as a way to open a discussion. But really, they provide an opportunity to sort of invite members of the community and decision makers to feel the type of neighborhood that could be created under various zoning provisions. It's really especially useful, we found, for having conversations about dimensional standards in zoning, which can be a little bit difficult to visualize in the abstract. So really doing a targeted approach to this by first looking on a block by block basis, what are the lot sizes, the frontage, the typical road frontage, the setbacks, the parking configurations that we see in some of our historic neighborhoods, and then inviting folks to take a walk with us and envision, whether this is something that should be pursued. So one example, a great example, was Wentworth Street. It's a pretty well-loved neighborhood in our community. It's a little bit set back from Main Street, but still firmly within the village core. And sort of in analyzing some of our lot sizes in our village area, we sort of came to this realization that the southern side of Wentworth Street, which is comprised of 6 single-family homes, are cumulatively on an amount of land area that adds up to 0.95 of an acre. So in having that discussion, it came to be realized that, under then current zoning, that if you had one plot of land that spanned that entire side of the street, you could not even subdivide it into 2 single-family home lots, let alone the 6 that have existed since the 30s or prior. It likely predates that a little bit, but it also has a road frontage of about 80 feet on average. So just sort of inviting members to think about the spacing of houses, how much land area each house has, where the house is situated on those individual lots, and just sort of opening a dialogue. This certainly wasn't the only street that we chose. We chose several streets to sort of highlight the range of different dimensional standards that could exist. So asking folks to imagine, in the event that we saw a new development, how do you like the feel of this neighborhood? What do you like about it? Do you think that the houses are too close together? Do you think they're just about right? Do you like this lot size? Is this something we should enable the creation of again? Because certainly this neighborhood predates zoning by 30 plus years, so it was developed, in a different era. But I think, when we had that discussion, a lot of folks felt that it was a lot easier to visualize what is a 10,000 square foot lot? What does a half acre look like? What does a street look like when it's developed with an 80-foot road frontage for the lots as opposed to 100 feet? It makes those discussions much more concrete and a lot less abstract, which makes them a lot easier to tackle whether you want to make these kinds of changes. So I would say, we probably have these examples in many of our historic towns where you could pick, a half dozen streets and highlight, what lot size exists there, and what would people in the community think about seeing more of those streets developed. So I'll turn it back to John, but we just wanted to highlight that because we thought that was a really interesting way to sort of analyze block by block. What do these abstract sort of numbers, 10,000 square feet, a half acre, what do they actually look like? What does it actually mean for, new development?
Right, thank you. Yeah, so in any kind of outreach, I think visual engagement can really be a very powerful tool. And I have some words up here about, words can evoke rich mental images, and they do. They can also very quickly lead us down the world of misconceptions and certain words we don't use them carefully, or even if we do. And of course, it's also words that we use to really convey our legally binding definitions when it comes down to zoning. So they are definitely important. However, to engage people and kind of draw them in, images can be really powerful, and they draw upon the familiar, and they can add variety of mental images to our already evoked ones by words. And I think if used smartly, they can also help us break through various misconceptions about what terminology means, and especially, what various terms mean. And so one of the places where I think it was really interesting for me was to look at our visual preferences activity and how that compared to our survey results. And so we did the survey asking what they liked and what they wanted, and we heard single family housing, and more single family housing, and that seemed pretty resounding. And then we did this visual preferences activity, and all of a sudden the kind of world opened up a bit more to various other opportunities for housing. And it really became, a question of how do you untangle the difference between a kind of morphology and a typology, what the shape of certain types of houses are versus their definitions, and understanding that there are certain types of multifamily housing people don't really want to see. But there are other types that really are acceptable. And if we just have that one word, it's a barrier that's hard to overcome in people's imagination. And how do we then, in a regulatory way, kind of respond to that? And I think that's an open question still for us that we're still trying to find answers to. Oh, that's right. I'm up next too. Yeah, so of course, the politics of housing choice and trying to find common ground in all of this. Housing can be deeply perilous and treacherous for people as they start to talk about this. And we have fears of what our community is going to look like and dreams of what our community is going to look like. And how do we get through all that? And how do we get through a conversation about demographics and changing demographics in town and keep us on track about providing housing and not, going into territory where we start labeling people? And I'm sure we've all been there in conversations before. And I'm not sure I'm going to go through everything on this slide here, but there are many kind of difficult things to work through on a political level. I list the kind of wants, the oughts, and the shalls because these, are often how I think about how we deal with some of these issues at the board level. What do we want? Do we want mixed use, R1, et cetera, diverse communities or not? What are we here to do? What ought we do? What's our kind of moral guidance here? Provide affordable housing for people, like for single family residential, I mentioned, right? Like a lot of people want this. What ought we do? Provide affordable housing. Can we do both? There's a tension there that's hard to resolve. And then what do we have to do? I mean, we have laws to follow, right? And that's the shall. So that is certainly part of, I think, all conversations. We don't always use those exact terms to describe it, but it happens. I was thinking about the kind of YIMBY and NIMBY conversation that often takes place. And obviously it's important to move beyond the kind of NIMBY conversations. And yet the YIMBY conversations, yes, in my backyard, kind of also give me some caution sometimes. Because yes, the positive attitude is really great, but do we want to just drop barriers everywhere and have it in all of our backyards? Or do we want to be a little bit more focused about planning for housing where it exists, engaging in that planning process and doing so smartly when it comes to reducing barriers, growing capacity, and all of that? Certainly on my mind has been like we have a housing shortage right now, and a lot of what we're doing is going to prevent us from getting there again in the future, but it's not really going to solve our current issues, and that's, I think, part of the conversation as well. As far as town meeting politics, I'm not going to kind of bore you with that right now. I think you've all kind of seen this in various ways before, but one kind of takeaway from this is that when it comes to engagement and outreach, a lot of our largest sample sizes were right up front in our engagement process. And as we got further along in the process to public hearings and such, it comes by the last public hearing, it can come down to one or two voices in our community that can really make or break an amendment. And how do you keep in place all of those earlier conversations and outreach when the larger numbers are front loaded? And with that, I'll turn it back to Joseph.
Yeah, so sort of to wrap up our section of this conversation, just to give a few pieces of information about what came out of this process so far. So, of course, the town of Plymouth received all three phases. One of those phases is regulatory development. Town meeting of 2024, 7 amendments were approved by the voters. They all passed with over 60% of the vote, many of them with quite a bit more than that. And these amendments broadly addressed a lot of the things that we spoke about earlier. They revised lot size, setback, frontage requirements to kind of align them better with the built form that exists in many areas of our community. This reduces barriers to new development that might be more in line with historic patterns that we heard a lot of love for in the engagement process. And it also allowed single family attached dwellings in groups of up to 4 in much of the community. So this was another housing type that we heard a lot of interest in, sort of the townhouse style, not sort of splitting the difference between a traditional multifamily and single family detached dwellings. A lot of support for that in the survey. And so adding that as a sort of carving it out as a new use and permitting it in many areas of the town was a way to sort of address that interest from the community. Also, accessory dwelling units permitted by right in most of the town. Requirements were simplified, just sort of addressing some of the types of housing that we certainly heard a lot of support for, and allowing development of these in hopefully a way that would be more cost effective. But so town meeting has come and gone. Those 7 amendments were voted on. What comes next? So, of course, with a planning process like this, town meeting is not just the end of the process. These processes should be ongoing. And so we have identified during the engagement and throughout the regulatory analysis several other potential regulatory changes that are still under discussion. So those discussions are ongoing about what should we do next? What does the community want to see out of this process going forward? Is it opportunities for new development around our Tenny Mountain ski area? Is it inclusionary zoning, modernizing our subdivision regulations? Well, to sort of get at that, we're holding something of a what's next community meeting in June to sort of re-engage with the community and get some ideas about which of the topics that there seemed to be support for early on that just for one reason or another couldn't be put forward this year, but there still seems to be some interest in. So what direction does the community, the steering committee, the planning board, where do we want to go? And that uh, sort of ties into one of the key takeaways that I think, as the town planner, I really have tried to embrace throughout this, which is, you've kind of got to embrace the process and approach it organically. It's not a process with an end goal of, town meeting and then it's done. You want the community to really feel a sense of ownership over the process and product. And I think in Plymouth, they really have. I think the community has really been very engaged in this process, involved. We've heard differing visions among citizens and decision makers, and we've heard a lot of great discussions. So why cut it short? A planning process should look beyond beyond March of this year, beyond March of next year, and allow the community to sort of think through where we want to go and how are we doing as far as getting there. Sort of monitoring the implementation of these amendments has a lot changed. 5 years out. Also, capacity. John touched on this earlier. For a smaller community, having that additional capacity, which was enabled by the HOP grant and Barrett planning, has really been just key to being able to have these discussions and undertake a planning process of the quality that we really want to be able to do here in Plymouth. And, I think that speaks to the importance of this program as a whole. It's not something that Plymouth could have done in this way without that extra support. So I guess all that is to say, there's a lot that's been going on in Plymouth. This project has really been a very big topic of discussion in the community over the past year, and I do believe that it will continue to be over the coming years. So we're looking forward to what's next, and we encourage everyone to stay tuned. But I think that about wraps it up for John and I, and we will turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you.
Okay, that's me. Where's it going? Well, I'm representing a different type of town from hearing about Plymouth. I agree with most of what was said about the planning and the whole process and how important this HOP grant was to really push forward things that this town could not have done on its own. The first slide just basically says something about the physicality of the town. Although it's one of the largest land-wise, it's a smaller community of less than 2,000 people, and a pretty homogeneous group at that, an aging population and not much in the way of diversity. But what triggered this was when the Lakes Region Planning Commission put out their housing assessment report in early 2023, the Sandwich Planning Board decided it should be something that's included on the work agenda for the year and apply for the grant. And that was underscored that at the 2023 town meeting, after all 38 warrant articles passed unopposed, we came to number 39, which is any other business to bring before the town. And that triggered a discussion on the need for some affordable housing to support certainly the younger workforce that was finding it difficult. The daycare center was in danger of closing because the staff couldn't find housing in the town. And the fire department got up and said, we are an aging out and we need people younger than ourselves in the area to be able to respond quickly to all our emergencies. And the school came forward and said the same about staffing. So even before the grant, we heard that the grant was awarded, the planning board started inviting guest speakers to its meetings to talk about the process and how things were done, where they were successful, and what might actually work for the town of Sandwich, especially because we don't have the infrastructure. The only sewer service is in the immediate downtown center, and it is not a wastewater treatment plant, so it has a capacity level that is being close to being full already. So we talked with people from the Lakes Region community developers, local people who had worked on a previous senior housing project in town, the local surveyor, the sewer commissioners, and any number of other people who were willing to talk to us about the past and what we could do into the future. We were awarded the grant for phases 2 and 3, and we were on a fast track to try to get something onto the 2024 warrant to do some type of incremental changes for this town. So let's go on to the next one. So our immediate thing was to do outreach, and simultaneously to having the audit done, the outreach began with the help of consultant Will Downey from Barrett Planning Group, who was extremely helpful and responsive. And we got out over 40 interviews and went to the senior lunches on Wednesday mornings and hung out at the library and at the transfer station and everywhere we could to get input from the community. And then put up an interactive survey on the website. And I'd like to thank Town Administrator Courtney Delaney for doing a wonderful job in handling that. We got over 200 responses, including at least 10 pages of written commentary that she went through and carefully analyzed and put up on the website. So that outreach became really important. We ended up having 2 housing forums, and before we even got to the stage of having the public hearings about what we were proposing to change in the zoning ordinance. And of course, in a small town like this, what you always hear about is the preservation of rural character. And as we all know, everybody has their own vision of what that is, what century they want to be stuck in, or what that actually means to preserve it and still be able to have some growth. So part of this ongoing, after we've got some of these amendments changed, that the planning board just felt that that is the very first step, and it is a continuing project to see what else will be successful, how what we have changed already will play out, and what the community thinks about it. Now, the community outreach was wonderful, because even now we've had several people approaching the planning board to help work on some other things. So that outreach was really important to find the support within the community. So we had 10 warrant articles that somehow addressed our incremental changes to the zoning ordinance. One of them was that even though multi-unit dwellings, including 2 or more, were in the zoning since 1983, even just the 2-unit was required to have almost twice the land area and a significant buffer around it that was equal to commercial use. So we pulled out the 2-unit and put it into being able to have the same requirements as a single family. Now, again, unlike Plymouth, about 98% of the housing in Sandwich is all single family home. And even in the survey showed that a good deal of them don't even have mortgages anymore. 34% have been living in the same house from 21 to 31 plus years. So it's a well-established population that we were dealing with. And a lot of the newcomers, especially in the post and COVID era, were a lot of people coming up and converting their seasonal homes to their permanent residence. So even the influx of whatever population growth there wasn't necessarily brand new people coming to the community, and especially younger people. So the results were that mostly well supported. The only one that got a little bit of pushback was allowing two-family homes in the historic district. But other than that, we're kind of going one step backward, because a lot of the phase one was looking at your master plan and updating it to be able to reflect these changes. Initially, we felt that, especially in the housing sector of the master plan, it was already supported. But looking back at some of our other chapters, and the master plan is from 2011, the planning board is now embarked on relooking at the master plan and updating other components of it that will also support further development ideas that would support some of the housing and people that we want to come to Sandwich. The lesson learned, of course, is, and I've heard it already expressed any number of times, that the outreach is the most important thing that you can possibly do. That the planning board realized that they serve the town, so they have to listen to all the community members that they serve and come up with solutions for what people think are problems, or decide that sometimes what we hear as a problem is we are creating a solution when we don't have a problem. So looking at my notes here. So we had a good turnout of people giving their opinions, and especially on the social media, which I think everybody has also had to deal with the amount of misinformation or loudest voices on the sandwich board in particular here, that brought up what we should be considering and learning to listen, and not necessarily have to respond to everything, but take all of it into consideration as to what the basis for the opposition was, what the valid points they were making, and especially around when you start to use, as referenced before, the language that goes with it. You say workforce housing, and we've got responses of immediate crime waves and the wrong kind of people in town. Until you pull out the HUD charts and everything about what is affordable these days, and what salaries don't meet the housing market. But I think in the end, the most important things were the clarity, simplicity, and brevity in meetings. Realizing that if you've been in the game long enough, you have a certain amount of lingo that you have to realize people don't understand, and get down to really working the basic, asking people what they want, what they need, what they think their town is, and what their town wants to be. And there were some wonderful interchanges, especially when somebody who comes in hot and heavy, and you see their face change and they start to nod their head. So I think those kind of things in a small town are the most important thing that a planning board can work towards, is making sure they understand that they are part of the community and they're there to serve the community, and at the same time to help educate the community as what we're trying to achieve. So I guess I don't have that much more to say. I do have just one remark here about my experience has been in 3 small New Hampshire towns, all under the with populations all under 2,000. Some of them barely making it to 1,500. And land boards are made up of hardworking volunteers with any number of experiences and expertise. And I really feel that certainly OPD and Mr. Hodges especially have been an invaluable resource in answering questions and giving guidance and training. And it really is important that we keep in touch with everything that's going on in the state. As much as Sandwich likes to think of its unique character all by itself in the middle of the Lakes region, it's part of a much wider world, and we have to participate as fully as possible. So, thank you.
All right, Mike, I think you're up next.
Great. So I take control.
Correct.
Did I do it right?
You did.
Nice. So again, I'm Mike Tardif, work with the Central New Hampshire Regional Planning Commission here in Concord. A little different approach because we've worked with 4 communities in this last stretch with the under the HOP grant. And actually, looking at the work that we've done, it's all tied in with master planning process as well. And it gives us an opportunity, a great opportunity to talk about some of the demographics that you were talking about in Sandwich, concerns in some communities, honestly about school enrollment. It's interesting, having done this as long as I've done this, and having discussed school enrollments in the 90s and the impacts on communities in some of our smaller communities. We're markedly down in the number of elementary school age kids. So but having that conversation, that the master plan allows us to have that demographics conversation and some of those higher level discussions about housing demand and the fact that younger families are competing for the same housing as folks my age. I would say that able to begin conversations about regulatory change with all those data points. When we got ready to lay out what we wanted to talk about the other day, we were talking a bit about just the fact that there's a lot of concern about data these days, and you hate to get bogged down with that perhaps folks don't trust the census data as much as they used to, and the ACS data. But having some conversations about just those data sets while you're working towards town meeting. So 4 communities that we worked in: Boscawen, Canterbury, Sutton, and Warner. The town of Sutton, we actually finished up working with them on their master plan and then jumped into this process. In Boscawen, concurrently with some looking at regulatory changes, we are working on the housing chapter. In Canterbury, we're working under a separate process that we started just before COVID, got delayed, just about done with the master plan. So it was nice to have that conversation as well about housing. In Boscawen, though, we the themes about outreach are important. The Riverwalk on Commercial Street was important. The tying these projects into other projects that are underway as well. There's a cleanup of the Allied Tannery, Commercial Street, hopeful to lead to redevelopment, tied in with hopes for mixed use development in that area, with some hope for housing development. How does that all kind of move forward? You have a patient conversation about regulatory change, but you also have to talk about how does it work financially? And, one of the things that we're looking at in Bosquen is the development of a TIF district. So, to handle help handle the extra costs that would be, experienced down there for water and sewer. The conversation about the TIF, for those of you that have worked on tax increment finance districts, sometimes you approve the town's ability to enter into a TIF and then develop the TIF plan in the same year. We decided to take a little longer path to that and just went ahead and did the warrant article, which was approved this year, just to approve the ability for Bosquen to develop that TIF plan, and we're going to address that at next town meeting. But a pretty positive town meeting experience, addressing a bunch of different housing issues in Bosquen. Everything passed. In Canterbury, the same. Everything passed. What did we learn in Canterbury? Pizza helps for many of our public meetings, starting very early. So, the days where you start talking about zoning changes in October or perhaps November, we really, you have to basically gear up after town meeting for next town meeting on some of these issues. So a lot of great conversations in Canterbury over the summer. Some skepticism was experienced, and there were some long meetings, and there was a full house many nights, but in the end, a great conversation about all things housing and a number of changes that were made relative to making the development of housing a little bit more straightforward were passed. One of the things we've been focusing on in Canterbury has to do with just the making the cluster ordinance a little bit easier to work with. And so those changes, and putting in some density bonuses if certain things are done, there's an opportunity for a density bonus to utilize the cluster. We're also now just about done looking at a combination of the subdivision and site plan regs into a land development handbook. I think many of us have experienced those, used those regulations that have been patchwork, modified over the years. The sub-regs don't really match the site plan regs. So, trying to work on the predictability of the process and understandability of the process. Sutton, we, it was the next step after the master planning process, and it was a master plan process during COVID that the planning board really did a great job of getting out there, doing as much as they could to hear from folks. A very positive experience, and one of the recommendations was to take a look at the community's village districts. Our process was not a successful one for town meeting, and I think one of the things that we've learned is that we need to step back in Sutton and perhaps revisit all those positive recommendations that came out of the master plan and see where that takes us for town meeting 25. So the planning board is, despite not having a successful town meeting season with regards to just the potential changes in the village district, I think are engaged in stepping back, really hearing, going out and being very proactive and meeting with other groups and working through what is a reasonable approach to implementing the master plan. And in Warner, all we're working on is the master plan itself, the housing chapter. I would say one of the lessons I have learned through all this process working with Warner is that those flashing highway signs work really well in getting the word out. And we did the same thing with our groundwater protection ordinance last year. It's hard to cut through all those emails. Hey, fill out a survey. Hey, we've got this opportunity for a housing forum. So if you've got a good relationship with your highway department and they've got one of those big flashing signs, put that note out on Main Street. Hey, we've got a forum. We've got our survey. We just had, we closed out the housing survey the other day, and over 400 responses, which is, remarkably more than we've had in the past. And, we all know what it's like to get these surveys through email, and you're going to do it some other time. And also, going to the fall foliage, getting the word out, going to other groups. We had a really well attended housing forum a couple of weeks ago. The UNH extension staff have been great helping with us with that too, and I've learned some things from them. But and realizing that folks sometimes can't make that, we're going to do a Zoom housing forum next week as well. So different ways to get the word out. So again, what have we learned? Community engagement can be in many forms. Going out to festivals, that's flashing signs work great. Change takes time. The one difficulty we ran into was just, through the HOP process was we had one town meeting. And, sometimes, these things take time. And, the great thing is, just working with planning boards, we'll be still here for town meeting 25. Perhaps there's some things that it takes to 26 because, every community is different. These things take time. Sometimes you have to step back and say, okay, strategically, what's the best approach for this town meeting? We can continue to build on that. And I guess I didn't really touch on this, but character matters. When we talk about cluster, what does that mean? Does that mean, that part of that is the design? Does it fit in our community? We talk a lot about multifamily farmhouse type development that fits into the community, and showing those examples helps in that conversation. That that cookie cutter multifamily, that there are different ways to approach that in different communities, and that really kind of throughout our four communities talking about those things strikes a chord and helps move the conversation forward. That's what I've got, Noah.
Great. All right, Judy. You're on mute.
I'm not on mute now. Thank you for reminding me, because I would have kept talking and not realized that no one could hear me. So hi, I'm Judy Barrett. And Noah, do I have these slides up correctly? It looks to me like we're seeing the whole deck.
You're in presenter view, so you should have a little thing. Everybody on the attendee side can only see your first slide, so you're good.
It rattled me a little bit too. It looks
Got it.
You should just have a little forward arrow there.
Got it. I'm fine. I'm fine. Presenter view helps people my age. And I'm going to talk about bias in a minute. So I'm Judy Barrett with Barrett Planning Group. We're a New England planning practice based in Massachusetts. Over the last 15 months or so, we have had a wonderful time working with several New Hampshire communities on HOP grants. I'm going to talk really generally about them, although I'll probably make a few comments along the way about some specifics. But just as a background, we've been working with Plymouth, which has been a fabulous experience. We're still working there. We're still working with the city of Berlin, which has also been a wonderful experience. My colleague Will Downey and my colleague Alexis Lanzalotta have worked on all of these projects in various roles. As Susan pointed out, Will worked with Sandwich, he worked with Lee, worked on the Plymouth regulatory audit. Alexis really sort of took the helm on community engagement in Plymouth. We're also currently working on a guidebook for New Hampshire housing on the RSA 79E community revitalization tax credits. And on it goes. And I think we'll probably be working with Rochester pretty soon. So that's kind of an overview of what we've been doing in New Hampshire. So I want to sort of start with this quote from Annius Nin. You may be familiar with it. We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. And I think this is really very much my experience with housing. My cover slide of the trying to get the horse to water is very much kind of what it's like. You can bring people to a certain point and you hope that they will come all the way, but often they don't. And so trying to find the things that they can support in hopes of enticing them to think about more opportunities for their community, often, as Mike said, does take more than one town meeting season. It can take 2 or 3 or more. But in particular, I think this quote is reminiscent for me of what it's like to bring up the phrase workforce housing. And I know I'm the oldest person on this panel, so I can tell you that I remember when the euphemism affordable housing was fairly new, because people didn't want to say low-income housing. So the terms keep evolving to create sort of a comfort zone for people to talk about what it is that they're talking about without triggering a lot of people's experiences or beliefs that may not really reflect reality, but people bring to the conversation where they've been or what they've heard. Because of that, there's a lot of myth building that gets intertwined with talking about affordable housing. And so people think things either because they've been told or because they had one experience with a person and they generalize it out to an entire population. But things like, what it means to be skinny, and people automatically assume you're anorexic, or, I wear glasses, so I must be a geek. I'm a person, so I must have some stereotype. It is always remarkable to me when I go into a community engagement process around housing to see the things that the baggage basically that people do bring to the conversation. I'm old, so I must play bingo. Nothing could be further from the truth. But I think part of what we all need to do in providing a safe framework for engagement is to help people question some of those myths that they do bring into the process, which makes it hard to have a conversation that's fair and equitable around a variety of housing needs, some of which have to do with affordability, some of which have to do with choice, some of which have to do with the impact on the year-round housing supply in seasonal or resort communities when you have a rising market of short-term rentals. So there's just a lot of issues in housing. Affordability happens to be a thing that we do a lot of work on, but it's not the only one. And it's not the only one that can be loaded for people. So when we talk about workforce housing, we really encourage people to think about it in lowercase terms. I sort of hate putting it that way, but it's true. It really is around your economy. And I've been saying this for 35 years. I'm always happy today to hear economic development professionals finally making that connection that housing and economic development are really intertwined, and that you have to think about the sort of composition of your economy, who's able to work in your community, where are people traveling from. I'm often interested in working on master plans and even on housing plans to see just sort of the geographic reach of a workforce in a community and where are people coming from. And one of the things I have found when you have the opportunity to look back at the data sets that track where people are coming from, is that we are seeing people coming from farther and farther distances to their place of work, because their place of work has become such a desirable place to be that they cannot find housing in the community where they have a job. And so the blame for traffic problems gets placed on new residents, especially on multifamily housing, when often it really has to do with housing stock that is in the community has outpriced people who try to work there. So getting people to just make that connection around, you want to have a healthy and vibrant and diverse economy, then you need to think about providing a variety of housing for people who are going to work in those jobs. This is going to become a critical conversation in the town of Plymouth around the future evolution of Tanny Mountain, where there are some very interesting plans being discussed about how this might evolve to be a more vibrant ski resort. With a variety of things that sort of stretch the season almost a year round, as many other ski resorts have found, large or small resorts. But you have to think about, well, who's going to actually work in this place and in the variety of uses it's going to take to make it a vibrant place that works economically. So I just would point out that when you're talking about workforce housing, it's fine to talk about the legal definition, which has specific income terms. But the really important thing is to connect it with the fabric of the local economy, and for people to at least appreciate that when people who work in their community can't afford to live there, it creates an equity question at least, as well as a potential real impediment for the employers in that community who are trying to find people to fill jobs. So when we work with communities, I think the first thing we try to encourage is just for people to learn about what is going on in their community. There are housing development proposals all the time. Not everybody is aware of them. They don't necessarily follow these things, but it's a good idea to just find out what type of housing development is happening in your community. Are there zoning changes on your town meeting warrant? I mean, blessing to Plymouth for the effort that was spent to educate the community around the town meeting changes that were proposed, because the educational effort clearly paid off, as Joseph and John, previously noted. People came to town meeting and passed these things that probably would not have passed if there hadn't been the level of effort by the planning board, the housing committee, and staff to just enlighten people about the issues in their community. Early on in Plymouth, we did a map of just where are the non-conforming properties, and we colored them in red, and it just sort of like the whole town sort of pops up on the map, because over time zoning changes had been made that caused this tremendous nonconformity, and as Joseph pointed out, really sort of took away from the historic character and fabric of the neighborhoods around the downtown area. It made no sense. So that made it possible, along with the walking tours, for people to see, oh my gosh, look what we've done. We kind of like these neighborhoods. Why don't we allow more of this? Or why don't we allow these homeowners to at least be taken out of a situation of nonconformity? Understanding the needs in your community. This is sort of where the leading the horse to water can get kind of difficult. But as I said, it's often not only about affordability, which is a critical piece, but housing choices as well, and simply the adequacy of supply to address the variety of kind of age and lifestyle situations that you have in your population. What are the barriers to development? When you increase frontage and you increase lot sizes, you make it harder to create or to extend and perpetuate a neighborhood fabric that people say they love, and they don't realize that they have just made it illegal. What is it that people worry about? I think one of the challenges for those of us who do a lot of work in housing is to recognize that there is the NIMBY factor, but then there are also legitimate concerns sometimes that come up with housing development proposals. And you have to have, I think, the sort of maturity on the one hand and the love of community on another to sort of take people where they are and to address the concerns that are legitimate instead of simply dismissing them all as NIMBY, because not everything is NIMBY. A lot of it may be, but not all of it. So understanding what the legitimate concerns are and figuring out ways to address them can help build credibility for broader housing initiatives. And then also, again, making that argument about the connection to economic development is just to talk to your local businesses. We recently finished a project on Martha's Vineyard for one of the towns there, where the inability of businesses to hire people because people can't live in that town, and the ferry service is only going to work so much from the mainland. There was just a real eye opener. You begin to understand why there are vacancies on Main Street, why workers just are not available to support the industries in some of these communities. So talk to your local employers, in my experience, is very important. The other thing that matters is forming alliances. This is sort of where you turn NIMBY into YIMBY. It's thinking about who are your local housing players. Some communities have a housing committee or a housing trust, a housing partnership, call it what you will. They sort of have different functions, but who are the housing players in your community? Working with the business community, working with clergy. I often find it interesting in planning that planners, for some reason, just don't seem to do enough outreach to the clergy in your community, but clergy know stories that no one else does, and they will share them. And if you're trying to build a base of support to come to community public hearings, that's an audience that you need to be talking with. You should be talking to teachers, school people, who can tell you not only about their experiences as employers trying to keep teachers employed, but also their students, the situations that their students are living with, and talk to the young adults who are trying to live in the community and are still in their parents' basement, like one that I have still living in my house. Thinking about helping people understand housing as a fundamental human right, I think is a real tough call. In some communities, that is just a hard thing to swallow. But again, part of kind of leading people to the water and then getting them to drink is to think about housing from a compassion point of view. It is a community need. It's an economic development need. Those two are inseparable. Supporting local officials and town staff who are trying to do the right thing. Don't expect your planning board and your town staff to go out on a limb if you're not willing to go out on it with them. I think that's just really important. Writing letters to the editor, because I'll tell you, the people who don't want housing will show up at public hearings, they will show up at town meeting, and they will write letters to the editor. So you have to really think about, how do you organize folks to counter that? And that energy is in every community, but sometimes you have to kind of work to find it. And then always remembering that when there are public hearings on projects in the community, to submit comments, because if you haven't read the book Neighborhood Defenders, you really should. What you find out is that the people who are very opposed are the ones who tend to show up, and the people who support stay home. And unfortunately, that really forms the impression of the board that has to make a decision. That's it for me. Noah, turning it back to you.
Sorry. So thank you all for your presentations. That took a little longer than I think we thought it was going to, but that's fine. I think there was a lot of really, really great takeaways. Here is the contact information, emails for all 5 of our speakers. If you have any kind of additional follow-up with any of them, I'm sure feel free to email them directly. We have about 10 minutes. We can go a couple minutes over for kind of a roundtable discussion. I know I have a couple of questions for our speakers, and feel free to put your questions in the chat. Here's just a reminder of how to use your meeting controls. We are going to try something. We're going to stop sharing so you can see all 5 of our speakers up close, and then we'll pull up the slide deck again in about 10 minutes. So. Okay, great. So I'll start asking questions, but again, attendees, if you have questions for our speakers, feel free to put them in the chat. Yeah. So my first question is, you talked a lot about what do you want to call them? NIMBYs, or you would just want to call them kind of people that just are resistant to any kind of change. How did you deal with that group of people that was basically trying to use town pride to weaponize and kind of amping up town pride to weaponize against any kind of change in that community?
If I may, I would say, I mean, I think it was Judy who said, really recognize that there's whatever their concern is, it probably really is coming from somewhere. And if you can kind of meet them on that page and recognize that they're human beings with real concerns, that's a good place to start. And the other place I often like to start besides that is just recognizing there are parts of our town that we really like. And often those parts of town point to types of zoning that we don't currently have, like all of those nonconformities. I can look at Plymouth and say, if we look at our downtown, it used to be a lot bigger, denser place than it is right now. And when we talk about like changing our character by allowing for more density, we used to have that. And that's part of some of our most celebrated moments in history. And if we want to preserve this rural character that so many are so concerned with, and rightfully so, we can't just keep sprawling out into what for us is our ag zone. And we need to start thinking about density where we have capacity and where we want it to be.
Great. Thank you, John. Others?
I found it helpful to talk to, well, our town moderator is also the president of the Historic Society, and I asked him to attend several of the meetings to give perspective. And once you get people talking about they don't want change, and then they talk about how many stores and businesses and activities were happening in the center of town that aren't there anymore, it's like, yes, things have changed. And do you want what we have now, or do you want what you remember to have had? And how do we achieve that? And it was interesting that people would kind of at least stop to think about, well, yeah, wait a minute here. We have empty storefronts in this small stretch of Main Street. So
I would completely concur that that history conversation, whatever, whether it's a village or it's the old farmhouses, is so important, and to bring that back, and also just have lots of opportunities to talk with, to hear from what folks have to say, and the planning board taking the lead on those conversations, and being open to hearing for those from those concerns, because those are folks that they definitely have some deep-seated concerns. Have that conversation, and give yourselves enough time to have that over a fair period of time.
Great.
Right. Take it back to myself for one more second. One of the things I always remind myself starting one of these conversations is what we agree on. There's a whole lot of stuff we agree on. And if we start our conversation where we disagree, we're getting nowhere. So if I can remind myself and then remind everyone there, all the stuff we actually do agree on before we start our conversation, that could be really helpful.
Yeah, to echo or to build off that, a great, a really interesting activity that the folks at Barrett Planning brought to us for some of our community meetings were just simple, when we were having facilitated group discussions, simple icebreaker activities that kind of center what people love about our community. It sort of helps get everybody into a discussion and coming into the discussion with a shared understanding that there's something about our community that we all love. There's a reason we're all showing up to have these facilitated group discussions about housing. At the end of the day, everybody has a shared passion for the community. Otherwise, I don't think they would have attended the meeting in the first place. So getting everybody on that same page, and even those sort of relatively simple, low-key icebreakers that got people going. That was a really great thing, I think, that Barrett brought to those meetings, and I think it really helped people just start an open and honest discussion, even when there was some disagreement. Everybody was coming into it with a shared sort of understanding.
I would also add too that to the extent that you can carry on conversations in your community outside official space and more in community space is a good thing to do, weather permitting, capacity permitting, and so forth. Simple things like tabling activities in a downtown area where you might have a board with a question on it and some Post-it notes or sticky dots or something, and a couple of housing committee members or planning board members who can just be there to talk to people, and just take it out of I think a more, what to some people is a more threatening space. We're not here to make a decision today. We're here to learn, and those kinds of activities can be very helpful.
Great. We do. I do have a couple more questions, but we did get just a couple of comments for the sake of time. I'm not going to read. We do have a really interesting question though, on going back to the first half of this morning's session on historic buildings. What resources, this is from Abby, what resources would the speakers see that could remedy this issue of the housing shortage and affordable housing, especially for people, the millennial generation and such that are, as Judy, you said, might still having to be living with their parents because of affordability. What kind of tools are there that you see for reusing or using historic buildings to help solve the housing crisis?
I want to jump in on this.
Please.
So Joseph, I have to defer to you. You're the client.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, please. I'll
One of
follow
the
up.
best historic preservation projects I've ever seen is right in my own town. It's a large home that years ago was just quietly divided through a special permit type process into 4 units. And you can't tell. You absolutely have no idea that this home is 4 condominiums. It is still the single family structure that was there. I grant you it's a very large building, so it didn't really need any additional new construction to make it work. The parking is behind the building. You only see it if you come down the side street. And that building was saved in a town where, frankly, a lot of demolition and rebuild has taken place because of the market in that town. So, thinking about the ease of conversion tools is not a bad idea. I will simply point out that sometimes conversion, in order to work, also needs new construction paired with it. But don't let your regulations get in the way of conversion. I wish Chris Kelly was still on this panel because I know he could speak to this as well.
Yeah, one thing that, I'll just speak a little bit to Plymouth's particular situation. I mean, radiating out from our downtown, we have our multifamily zoning district, which is mostly large single-family homes that have been converted to smaller multifamilies. And historically, many of those, at least throughout the 80s, 90s, and into the first part of the 2000s, were largely rented out to college students. So at some point, zoning requirements as far as lot size, density allowances, setbacks, sort of ratcheted up over the years to the point that prior to undertaking this process, in the multifamily zone in Plymouth, right in the core of the village, there were only 7 properties with enough acreage to even add a second unit if they were built today. So freezing those, in some ways, the way that those neighborhoods were zoning has changed around them, rendering them entirely non-conforming, which makes it hard for those buildings to organically meet the demands of the time. And we did see examples where a building, a historic building was taken down and just replaced with, one single family home, even on a lot that was substantially larger than, what exists around it. I mean, those lots tend to be significantly smaller than a half acre, or certainly smaller than an acre. So in some ways, part of it is looking at what has changed in the zoning that has inhibited those buildings from continuing to keep up with the times. They were rendered non-conforming, and now, we have them essentially frozen as they were in about 1986, which was a certain point in the lifespan of those buildings. It wasn't the first use that they had in them, and it likely wouldn't be the last, but allowing them to continue to evolve is important.
And it should be said that was a choice for fear of what it could be through students, what multifamily housing might be for all kinds of scare tactics about criminals and other people moving in. And so it's not like it wasn't a choice. It wasn't an accident.
Great. So I got time for one more question. I want to ask kind of a wrap-up question here. That's okay. I do realize we're a couple minutes over, so we're going to bleed into our break. But to the degree that this came up, how did you deal with, and I know this is a big question, how did you deal with either misinformation, disinformation, kind of myths running around, or general distrust in government overall, and kind of a project like this?
So you really want to close with that, Noah?
Just a couple of minutes.
You'll have another hour, yeah.
I think you have to describe where the data are from. You have to, acknowledge, yes, census data are, there are some, issues with the census data. Hear from folks, describe what where the data are from, but also don't get bogged down with that distrust. I'm just talking from the data side. Have that conversation, that give and take with on the bigger issues, and give it the amount of time, like I said, to have that give and take over a number of meetings.
Great. Others? Are you just
well,
go ahead?
Usually, town officials or anybody in the government really shouldn't be chiming in onto the gossip column of today, which is the social media. And it's really difficult when you see so much being said that is really misinformed. That's where you have to kind of recruit some of your supporters to be able to at least post, if you want if you want the facts on this and give them resources to look it up, and we're trying our best to get people to more and more look to the town website for what the official town business is all about. It's a very, these people in this town participate a lot, and you get the right people being able to talk amongst themselves, and a lot of the heat does dissipate. And we're thinking of maybe doing some sort of like email blast or something that people can subscribe to, wanting to get information sent to them on a regular basis. And having to figure that out and who will manage all of that is something that we're looking to. But you can't just stand up and shout back. That doesn't work.
And I might just another sort of building off of that briefly here. You know, a part of it as well is how does the community view the project? Do they view it as something that's being imposed on them, or do they feel like it's a bottom-up process, starting with the community as a whole, and that they have ownership over what's going on? And I think that makes all the difference, because if the community is where the conversation starts, and that's where, and they have the ability to have input and ownership throughout the process, but also throughout the development of the product, the end result. I mean, that really sets up a totally different dynamic that I think people know when, you know, the community has a sense of ownership. This is the community's process. It's not, you know, something else other than that. I think that's key.
You're on mute, John.
Oh, am I muted?
No, you're
Am I
good. You
good?
just cut out for a
Okay.
second. You're good. Yep.
Oh, okay.
I lost my train of thought. Okay. I try to, as much as I can, avoid using my own positive anecdotes, because I know that opens the door to all the other anecdotes. That if I can use my positive anecdotes, all the other ones are to come flooding in as well, and I really have no ground to say, no, let's stick to the facts.
I also think, though, you know, organizing the supporters, however few they may be, is really critical, because there's got to be another voice that's speaking in public. The folks who are opposed for whatever reason, legitimate or not, will speak. You know, you have to give them credit, but it's the getting the people who are who want to support housing, who have an interest in the social and economic issues addressed by housing. It's helping them, it's training them, it's empowering them, it's showing them the different ways in which they can be heard in the community, and getting them to speak. I think organizing the support, I don't care what the issue is, organizing the support is critical.
Great. I think we heard from everybody. So I wish we could continue this for another half an hour. I'm gonna re-pull up our slides here, so we have a couple minutes to move on or break before our last session of the day. Should be another interesting one. Hold on, bear with me one moment. This is the danger of trying to do this on the fly. Let's see if this is going to take us to the right spot. Great. So as I mentioned at the outset, more information coming, but there's $2.9 million more of HOP grant funding. If you go to the New Hampshire NHOPgrants.org and click on Learn More, there's some initial information with more to follow. I know New Hampshire Housing and Plan New Hampshire are planning a couple of orientations. So stay tuned for that information. As I said at the outset, existing HOP grantees will have first dibs. Well, everybody will be able to apply for those funds, and existing grantees will kind of basically, their applications will be adjudicated first. With that, again, I want to thank all of our speakers. This has been great. And we're going to have more like a 5-minute break now. And then we'll have our final session of the day. What's old is new again, affordable homeownership and community. Really fascinating presentation from Sarah Marchant from the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund, and Nathan Rickert from the City of Lebanon Planning and Development Director on all the very innovative housing related changes that Lebanon is making. So hopefully you can stay tuned for that. Take care all.